Welcome back to the Genesis Science Report. Tonight, tuskless elephants. Once a rare sight, are now becoming more common in certain parts of Africa. Now, a recent study attributes this change to intense poaching pressure, framing it as a clear example of evolution in action. But is that really the case? Joining me in studio to take a closer look at the evidence is Dr. Randy Guliuzza, president of the Institute for Creation Research and a leading expert in biological design. Dr. Guliuzza is a medical doctor, engineer, and aerospace medicine specialist who's written extensively on the flaws in some of Darwinian thinking. Dr. Guliuzza, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. I always love being on your programs.
It is an honor to have you here today to talk about these elephants in Mozambique. Can you tell me maybe a little bit about this new report and what it is suggesting?
Right, it's a recent report, just came out a few days ago, and it was Modern Proof of Evolution is how it was headlined there. And they began by saying what everybody knows is that you really can't see evolution in action. And they said most of the time it's supposedly a very slow, creak-along process, so glacially slow that nobody in their lifetime can ever see it. Well, of course, right there, that takes it out of the realm of science because it's never been observed.
Right. And of course, they're using this evidence. They said, well, the elephants of Mozambique, there's an increase in tuskless female elephants, and that's a clear representation of natural selection because the population has turned tuskless to sort of decrease the poaching activities, right?
Right. It reports on, unfortunately, a tragic case during a civil war in Mozambique where many of these creatures, not just elephants, were killed for their tusks or ivory or something that they could sell to fund their war efforts. But the percentage of tuskless females in the population dropped.
Yes.
The percentage of the tuskless females in the population actually increased because the ones with tusks dropped out of the population.
I gotcha.
So the tuskless ones before the poaching were about 18 to 20% of the population, but after the poaching of the ones with tusks, the percentage of the females without tusks in the population went up over 50 to 51% of the population, according to the report.
Okay, so could this be natural selection?
No, not even close. This shows how imprecise language can mislead a lot of people.
Yeah.
You have humans with a real brain really selecting against, in this case, those with tusks, because it's a selection against because they're killing them to get their tusks. So the point is that you have people with a real brain making real selections, making real choices, which, by the way, evolutionists call that artificial selection.
Right.
Yeah, they call that artificial. Something with a real brain
is artificial, and yet nature is the one with the mind that actually selects. How twisted can you get?
Yeah, totally twisted on that.
Okay, so the study emphasizes the role of human activity in driving evolutionary change. They do say that, oh yeah, hunters played a part, but they're not actually looking at it as if, well, you cull out all of the elephants with tusks, and it makes sense that the tuskless elephants will breed and produce more tuskless elephants.
That's right, exactly. It's not anything close to the passive process which Darwin was imagining. It's an active process just like any human breeder would do if you were selecting for a specific trait. Let's say you were breeding for cattle and you wanted more meat mass, or if you were breeding for horses and you wanted a faster speed, you're breeding for roses, you want a particular color. You have something with a real human brain, and they're actually selecting for these traits.
Okay, so when evolution is basically pushed, and it's being pushed like crazy, this agenda, this narrative for the last 150 years has saturated media. It's saturated the airwaves. Now it's even saturated children's books. It's saturated our kids' programming. It's saturated every college, every university campus when it comes to biology as the only possibility, the only way of thinking about it. So when you see something like this at work, and then when researchers begin to study it, they're only able to see evolution as a potential mechanism because that's the only option available. That's what they believe is the only option available to them as real scientists. Expound on that for a moment.
Well, you're talking about a mind saturation with a particular viewpoint that really constrains how you think, and since it's constraining how you think, it constrains what you actually see, even when you're not seeing what you are calling it. In this particular case, they're calling this selective event by human beings an instance of natural selection as they see it, because that's the only way they can really conceive of it in their mind, even though it's clearly a case of selective breeding, but you're just not breeding for the tusks in this particular case. So it's taken hold of the minds, and it affects how you see it, and it affects how you interpret, it affects how you explain things, and eventually, unfortunately, as you say, it'll even get into children's books, and they won't be able to interpret this event correctly. They'll still call it natural selection.
Right. Okay, but tell me, where is all of the new scientific data leading? A lot of it shows what appear to be design patterns, a lot of it shows complexity, and a lot of it shows this sort of framework of engineering when it comes to biology. Tell me, how should we be counteracting these negative effects of the agenda that's being pushed, and where should we take science?
Well, we need to actually go back towards an engineered basis of science, that when we look at creatures, we start to explain their functions in terms of basic engineering principles. In this particular case, this is just a case of selective breeding right here. This isn't natural selection, this is artificial selection, but many times you have to look very, very carefully, because creatures can change with environmental changes, and it has nothing to do with natural selection. It's an innate ability within them that they're able to track very carefully the environmental changes through innate sensors, innate programming, and output mechanisms which lead to responses which are so purposeful and so targeted to the change that they can even be predictable, and it's pointing to a highly engineered, highly regulated innate mechanism which leads to adaptation.
Okay, when you talk about sensors inside of these animals, expound on that a little further.
Well, we have eyes, that's a sensor. We have ears, they're sensors. And these are the most obvious ones. They are gathering information, they're actually gathering data from the world around us. But we have pressure sensors, we have pain sensors, we have stretch sensors, we have sensors that can detect other microbes inside of us. We have literally thousands of different types of sensors which are sending information back to the organism or back to the cells, which then can be processed, leading to purposeful responses at the cellular level and all the way at the organism level.
Wow. But that is radically different than the idea that something outside, something within nature, it gets colder, and so therefore somehow the environment changes the creature.
That's right. It gets colder and you start to shiver.
Yeah.
And so the environment doesn't send a signal, some magical signal, even though you read this in scientific papers all the time. Yeah. It doesn't send a signal to you to start shivering. What actually happens is the temperature is what the temperature is. It's either hot or cold. It is what it is. Your body detects that. Not only can it detect it, the information is sent inside, and it's going to compare to a set point. It's not only going to monitor the outside temp, but it's really monitoring your inside temp. It's comparing it to a set point that it wants to maintain, and then when it deviates from that outside a certain parameter, your body then will initiate a response, in this particular case, shivering, which is a way to generate heat to try to raise that internal temperature back to the set point.
So sensors detect a change, and then they generate the correct response to affect that change.
That's right.
Okay, let's talk about how quickly this can take place within an organism. Are we talking about something that is going to take several 100,000 years of generation after generation slowly adapting to those changes, or is this something that happens more quickly?
More quickly, and the example I gave you is a physiological change, which everybody identifies with. But adaptation is really a spectrum that covers everything from rapid physiological changes to multi-generational changes, which also can be quite rapid. They can happen within a single generation. And we now know there are mechanisms which do not require changes to the genes themselves, but mechanisms which regulate the expression of those genes, even while a bird's still in the egg or a baby's still developing inside its mother's womb, it's leading to changes of expression to genes and different traits that can happen within one generation, which then continue over multiple generations. So adaptation, physiologic to multi-generational.
Very, very interesting. Dr. Guliuzza, you were a part of a very large project, a video series called Made in His Image, which even relates the design and engineering of the human body, of each and every single person watching this program right now, to a designer. Can you tell me about this series?
Oh, that's a great devotional series. It really leads people to worship the Lord Jesus, and it talks about how we can maintain balance, even doing incredible athletic feats, the skills of our hands, how a baby can go from a water world inside a mom to an air world in a single breath, and the incredible capability of your eye to gather data that is processed at speeds which are just mind-boggling in terms of what computer engineers can do today. So it really points to the genius, wisdom, and power of the Lord Jesus.
And I have seen it extremely well produced, just a joy to watch, very educational, made in His image, exploring the complexities of the human body. ICR.org. Dr. Guliuzza, thank you so much for being here and addressing this today, and I'd love to have you back in the future as many, many more agenda-driven articles come out.
It'd be my pleasure.
All right. And thank you for joining us. We will be back after the break with more fascinating information on the Genesis Science Report.